James Carter pulled into the parking lot of Lincoln High School, his old Ford pickup rattling as it settled near the back fence. The lot was packed with cars, families spilling out with balloons and homemade signs. It was a warm June evening in a small Georgia town, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and anticipation. James stepped out, smoothing the creases of his army dress uniform. The jacket fit snug, medals pinned neatly to his chest, boots polished to a shine. He wasn't here to stand out, but to keep a promise. His daughter, Maya, was graduating today, and he'd driven 10 hours from Fort Bragg to see her walk that stage. 2 years ago, he'd lost his wife, Lena, to cancer, and every mile in that truck felt like a conversation with her memory. He slipped a faded photo of Lena holding baby Maya into his pocket and whispered, "We made it, love." The school's brick building loomed ahead, flags snapping in the breeze. Parents chatted, kids ran around, and a few grandparents shuffled toward the gym. James walked slow, each step heavy with meaning. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face that held both calm and storm. His time in the Army had taught him to carry both. At 45, he'd seen too much to flinch at crowd or noise, but today his chest tightened with something else. Pride, maybe, or the ache of Lena not being here. Inside, the gym was a mess of noise. Folding chairs lined the floor, bleachers packed with families. The air smelled of sweat and cheap perfume. James showed his ticket to a volunteer, a nervous woman with a clipboard, who waved him to the second row, family seating. He nodded thanks and moved through the crowd, catching eyes that lingered on his uniform a second too long. Some smiled, others turned away quick. He was used to it. James found his seat, a wobbly plastic chair, and sat down. The stage was simple. Banners read, "Class of 2025," in bold blue letters. Maya was somewhere in the back, probably fixing her cap for the 10th time. He smiled at the thought. She had her mother's eyes and her stubborn streak. He remembered her as a kid, demanding he read her one more story before bed. Now she was 18, ready to start college. Time moved too fast. The gym buzzed around him. Parents laughing, a kid dropping a soda can, someone's phone ringing too loud. James stayed still, hands on his knees, eyes on the stage. The photo in his pocket pressed against his chest. A quiet anchor. The music started, pomp and circumstance, and everyone stood. James rose, shoulders square, his presence steady. The national anthem followed, and he stood taller, not needing to put a hand over his heart. His whole life was a salute. He thought of Lena, how she'd have been fussing over Maya's gown, probably crying already. The anthem ended, and the crowd sat, but James felt eyes on him. 2 security guards walked down the aisle, their boots loud against the wood floor. They wore black polos, radios clipped to their belts, and stern looks. One was short, stocky, with a buzz cut and a scowl. The other was taller, lean, chewing gum like he was bored. They stopped beside James. "Sir," the short one said, voice low but sharp, "we need you to come with us." James turned his head slow, meeting the guard's eyes. "What's the issue?" His voice was calm, steady. The tall one leaned in. "This section's for families of graduates. We got a call it's full." James pulled out his ticket, holding it up. "Second row, family seating." I showed it at the door. The short guard, badge reading Tanner, didn't even glance at it. "It's full now. There's seats in the back." James didn't move. "It was full when I sat down." "Who gave you that call?" Tanner's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. Let's go." A few heads turned. A woman nearby whispered to her husband. James kept his eyes on the guards, his hands still. He'd faced worse than this. Deserts, gunfire, nights that never ended. "I drove 10 hours for my daughter," he said, voice low. "I'm staying right here." The tall guard, badge saying Cole, smirked. "Don't make this a problem, man." That word, man, hit like a jab. James knew what it meant, what it hid. He'd heard it before in stores, on bases, in places where his uniform didn't matter as much as his skin. He stayed still, but his mind sharp and ready. Behind him, the crowd hushed a little. A man in the 4th row stood up, slow and deliberate. He was broad, bearded, wearing a plain jacket, but his stance screamed soldier. James didn't turn, but he knew who it was. Marcus Reed, a man he'd pulled from a burning truck in Iraq. Another man stood, then a third, all quiet, all steady. They didn't need to speak. James had led them through hell, and they'd never forgotten. Tanner noticed, his hand twitching near his radio. "Sir, last chance," he said, louder now. James looked straight ahead. "I'm not moving." The air tightened, the gym's noise fading as more eyes turned their way. Something big was coming, and everyone felt it. The gym's hum softened as Tanner's voice cut through, sharp and impatient. "You're holding things up," he said, leaning closer to James. His radio crackled, a muffled voice on the other end. James stayed still, his eyes locked on the stage where students adjusted their caps. He thought of Maya, how she'd worked nights at a diner to help with bills after Lena's funeral. He wasn't going to miss her moment. "I'm not holding anything up," James said, voice low but firm. "You are." Cole, the taller guard, shifted his weight, his gum-chewing slowing. "Look, we're just doing our job. Move to the back and we're good." James tilted his head slightly. "Your job is to check tickets. You did that. I'm where I belong." Tanner's face reddened. He glanced at the crowd, noticing the whispers spreading like ripples. A woman in a floral dress clutched her purse, her eyes darting between James and the guards. A teenager nearby pulled out a phone, angling it subtly. James caught it, but didn't react. He'd been here before, watched, judged, sized up. He'd learned long ago that moving wasn't always surrender, but staying put was power. "You don't get it," Tanner said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "We got orders." Someone complained about the seating. James raised an eyebrow. "Who complained?" Tanner hesitated. His eyes flickered to Cole, who shrugged. That pause told James everything. There was no complaint, just an excuse. Before Tanner could answer, a new voice broke in, sharp and clear from the aisle. "What's the problem here?" It was Marcus Reed, the bearded man who'd stood first. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like a man who'd given orders under fire. Tanner spun around, caught off guard. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped. Marcus stepped closer, his boots heavy on the floor. "It does, when you're bothering my brother." James didn't turn, but his chest warmed. Marcus wasn't blood, but war made family. They'd shared blood in the sand, pulling each other through chaos in Iraq. Now Marcus was here, unasked, like he'd always been. Cole raised a hand, trying to take control. "Sir, back off. We're handling this." Marcus didn't blink. Handling what? A man sitting in his seat? Another man stood, this one leaner, with a scar across his knuckles. Darius Holt, another from James's old squad. Then a third, Caleb Moore, stood near the bleachers, arms crossed, eyes steady. The gym's energy shifted, the crowd's chatter fading to a tense hum. James kept his gaze forward, but he felt them, his squad, his shield. Tanner's hand hovered near his radio again, his voice tighter. "You're making a scene. All of you." James finally looked at him. "You made the scene. I'm just watching my daughter graduate." A new twist came fast. A woman in a navy blazer, the assistant principal, Ms. Harris, appeared at the aisle's edge. Her face was tight, her clipboard clutched like a shield. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp but nervous. Tanner straightened, pointing at James. "This guy's in the wrong section. We're moving him." Ms. Harris frowned, glancing at James's uniform, then his ticket still in his hand. "Let me see that," she said. James handed it over, his movements slow, deliberate. She scanned it, her brow furrowing. "This is family seating. His ticket's valid." Tanner's jaw dropped slightly. "But we were told." Ms. Harris cut him off. "Who told you?" The question hung heavy. Cole shifted, his gum chewing stopped. Tanner stammered, Someone from the office." Ms. Harris's eyes narrowed. "Someone? You don't know?" The crowd was fully watching now. Phones out, whispers louder. A man in the back muttered, "Let him stay." James felt a shift, the room tilting in his favor. But then another twist hit. A fourth man stood, this one older, gray at the temples, Eli Walker, the squad's medic. He didn't speak, just moved to stand behind Marcus, his presence like a wall. The guards froze, realizing they weren't just facing James. They were facing a unit. Ms. Harris handed James his ticket back. "You're fine right here," she said, her voice firm now. She turned to Tanner. "You too, step back. Now." Tanner's face burned, but he didn't move. Cole tugged his arm, muttering, "Let's go, man." They retreated a few steps, but Tanner's eyes stayed on James, like he wasn't done. James didn't flinch. He thought of Lena, how she'd always said, "Stand tall, even when they push." He was standing now, not just for Maya, but for every time he'd had to prove he belonged. The stage lights flickered, and a name was called. The ceremony pushed on, but the air was thick with what hadn't been said, and what was still to come. The gym lights dimmed slightly as the principal took the stage, his voice crackling through the mic. "We'll begin with our salutatorian speech," he said, oblivious of the tension simmering in the second row. James sat steady, his hands resting on his knees, the photo of Lena and Maya in his pocket, grounding him. The crowd's whispers faded, but he still felt eyes, some curious, some sharp. Tanner and Cole lingered near the aisle, their radios quiet now, their faces tight with frustration. Ms. Harris had returned to her seat, but she kept glancing back, like she sensed trouble wasn't done. James didn't look at them. His focus was on the stage, where Maya would soon walk. He pictured her smile, the one that mirrored Lena's, and it kept him calm. Marcus, Darius, Caleb, and Eli stood nearby, not crowding James, but close enough to be felt. Their presence was a shield, forged in years of trust. James remembered a night in Baghdad, when Darius took a bullet in the shoulder and still dragged a wounded Eli to safety. James had been there, calling the shots, keeping them alive. Now, they were here for him, no questions asked. The salutatorian, a nervous kid with glasses, started his speech about dreams and hard work. The crowd clapped politely, but James barely heard it. His mind was on Maya, on the promise he'd made to Lena to always be there for her. He wouldn't let two guards break that. Then came a twist. A woman's voice, soft but clear, cut through the gym's hum. "Excuse me, sir, you're in my seat." James turned slightly. An older woman, maybe 60, stood in the aisle, her gray hair pulled back, a graduation program clutched in her hands. She wasn't looking at James. She was staring at Tanner, who'd slid into an empty chair nearby. Tanner blinked, caught off guard. "Ma'am, I'm security," he said, standing halfway. She didn't budge. "That's not a security seat. It's for families. My grandson's graduating, and I'm sitting there." Her voice was firm, no trace of fear. The crowd nearby stirred, a few nodding. Tanner's face flushed again. "Ma'am, I'm working here," he tried, but she crossed her arms. "Work somewhere else." James stayed quiet, but a small smile tugged at his lips. The woman, whose name tag read Mrs. Ellis, wasn't backing down. Cole stepped over, trying to smooth things. "Ma'am, we'll find you another spot," he said, his tone softer now. Mrs. Ellis shook her head. "I've been coming to this school for 30 years. I know my rights. That's my seat." The crowd's attention shifted, phone still out, capturing the standoff. Marcus leaned toward James, his voice low. "She's got more fight than those two combined." James nodded slightly, his eyes still on the stage. This wasn't his battle now, but it felt connected, like the room was waking up. Another twist hit. A young man in a cheap suit, probably a teacher, hurried down the aisle, whispering to Ms. Harris. Her face tightened, and she stood, moving toward Tanner and Cole. "You too, with me," she said sharply. They followed her to a corner, their heads low as she spoke fast, her hands gesturing. James caught fragments, something about a mix-up, a name, a mistake. He didn't need to hear it all. Someone had pointed him out, tried to push him out, and now it was unraveling. The teacher glanced at James, then away, his face pale. James kept still, his heart steady but heavy. He'd seen this before, people acting before thinking, then scrambling when caught. The salutatorian finished, and the crowd clapped louder this time. Maya's name was getting closer. James felt it in his bones, like a clock ticking. He thought of Lena's last days, how she'd squeeze his hand and said, "Make sure Maya knows she's enough." He'd promised her, and he was here now, keeping that vow. But the air shifted again. Tanner and Cole returned, their faces grim, but they didn't approach James. Instead, they stood by the gym's side door, whispering to each other. Tanner's eyes flicked to James, then away. Something was brewing. Marcus noticed, too, his stance tightening. "They're not done," he muttered. Darius, nearby, cracked his knuckles, silent but ready. A new voice broke the tension. "Dad!" It was Maya, standing at the edge of the stage, her cap slightly crooked. She wasn't supposed to be there. She should have been with the graduates. Her eyes were wide, locked on James and the guards. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice small but clear. James stood, his heart lurching. "Nothing, baby girl," he said, forcing a calm he didn't fully feel. "Just sit tight." Maya hesitated, her gown swaying as she glanced at the crowd, then back at him. "You okay?" she asked. James nodded, his voice steady. "I'm right here." She smiled, nervous but trusting, and slipped back to her place. The gym felt smaller now, the stakes higher. Whatever came next, James wasn't moving. The principal's voice echoed through the gym, calling names one by one. James sat steady, his eyes fixed on the stage, but his senses were sharp, picking up every shift in the room. Maya's brief appearance had lit a fire in him. She'd seen the trouble, and he wouldn't let her down. The photo of Lena in his pocket felt heavier, a reminder of why he was here. Marcus, Darius, Caleb, and Eli stood nearby, their presence a quiet wall of strength. Tanner and Cole hovered by the side door, their whispers sharp and urgent. Ms. Harris was back in her seat, but her eyes kept darting to the guards, like she knew something wasn't settled. The crowd's energy was thick. Phone still out, capturing every moment. A new name was called, and the crowd clapped, but James felt a shift. A man in a suit, older, with a slick smile, approached the guards from the back of the gym. He was out of place, too polished for this small-town crowd. Tanner nodded at him, then pointed subtly at James. The man, whose badge read Mr. Lawson, event coordinator, leaned in, whispering fast. James caught a glimpse but didn't turn. He knew this game. Someone pulling strings, trying to push him out. Marcus noticed too, his jaw tightening. "That guy's trouble," he muttered to Darius, who nodded, his scarred knuckles flexing. James kept his focus on the stage, but his mind raced. Who was Lawson, and why was he circling now? The twist deepened. Mrs. Ellis, the older woman who'd stood up to Tanner, wasn't done. She shuffled toward Ms. Harris, her program still clutched tight. "That man," she said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear, pointing at Lawson. "He's the one who told them to move this gentleman." Heads turned. Ms. Harris stood, her face a mix of shock and anger. "Mrs. Ellis, are you sure?" she asked. The older woman nodded. "Heard of myself outside, telling those guards to clear the front for important guests. Said it was a favor." The crowd murmured, the word favor, sparking whispers. James's stomach tightened. A favor for who? He'd faced this before, people bending rules to keep him out of spaces they thought he didn't belong in. Ms. Harris marched toward Lawson, her heels clicking. "Mr. Lawson, explain this," she said, her voice cutting through the gym's noise. Lawson smiled, smooth as oil. "Just a mix-up, Karen. We needed space for some donors." Ms. Harris's eyes narrowed. "Donors don't get family seats. You know that." Lawson shrugged, but his eyes flicked to James, then away. Tanner shifted uncomfortably, his radio crackling again. Cole muttered something to him, and they stepped back, like they sensed the tide turning. James stayed still, his hands calm, but his heart pounded. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about someone trying to erase his place. Another twist hit. A girl's voice rang out from the stage. "Ms. Harris." It was Maya again, now standing with another graduate, a boy with a nervous grin. "Can I say something?" she asked, her voice shaking but loud. The principal, caught off guard, nodded. Maya stepped to the mic, her gown swaying. "My dad's a veteran. He drove all night to be here. He's not moving, and he shouldn't have to." The gym went quiet. then erupted in claps. A few people stood, cheering. James's throat tightened. He hadn't expected this. His daughter, fighting for him. Marcus leaned in, his voice low. "That's your girl, Carter." James nodded, pride swelling, but worry too. Maya had just made herself a target. Lawson's smile faded, his face pale. Ms. Harris turned to him, her voice low but sharp. "You're done here, Tom. Leave." Lawson hesitated, then walked out, his steps quick. Tanner and Cole exchanged looks, their confidence crumbling. The crowd was alive now, clapping louder as Maya stepped back, her eyes locked on James. He gave her a small nod, his way of saying, "I'm here." But the air wasn't clear yet. Tanner's radio buzzed, and a new voice came through, loud enough for James to hear. "Check the list again." "He's on it." Tanner's face fell. He whispered to Cole, who shook his head, both realizing they'd been played. Someone had set them up, and now the truth was slipping out. James kept his eyes on the stage, where names kept rolling. Maya's was close. He thought of Lena, how she'd have loved this, her daughter, bold and fierce. The squad around him didn't move, but their presence was enough. The crowd's cheers for Maya lingered, a wave of support James hadn't expected. Mrs. Ellis sat down, her face proud. "Told you," she said to no one in particular. But James knew this wasn't over. Lawson's exit felt too easy, and Tanner's radio kept buzzing. Something bigger was behind this, and it was waiting to strike.
The gym's energy buzzed as the principal called another name, the crowd's claps echoing off the walls. James sat firm, his eyes on the stage, but his senses caught every move around him. Maya's bold stand at the mic still rang in his ears, her words a spark that lit the room. He felt pride, sharp and warm, but worry too. She'd put herself out there, and he knew how fast things could turn. Marcus, Darius, Caleb, and Eli stayed close, their silence louder than any shout. Tanner and Cole stood by the side door, their faces tight, radios quiet now. Ms. Harris was back in her seat, but her eyes flicked to the guards, then to James like she was bracing for more. The air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. A new twist came quick. A man in a faded jacket, sitting a few rows back, stood and walked toward the aisle. He was short, wiry, with a limp, someone James hadn't noticed before. His face was hard, eyes locked on Tanner. "You messed up," he said, his voice rough but clear. Tanner turned, startled. "What's that?" The man pointed at James. "That's Sergeant Carter. You don't know who you're dealing with." The crowd leaned in, whispers spreading. James recognized the voice. Ray Torres, a mechanic from his old unit, who'd fixed their Humvee under fire in Fallujah. Ray hadn't been part of the squad's core, but he'd always shown up when it counted. Now he was here, unasked, adding weight to James's side. Tanner's jaw tightened. "This ain't your business," he said, but his voice wavered. Ray stepped closer, his limp not slowing him. "You made it everyone's business when you tried to push him out." The crowd stirred, a few clapping. Mrs. Ellis, the older woman, nodded from her seat, her eyes sharp. Ms. Harris stood again, her voice cutting through. "Mr. Torres, please, we're handling this." Ray didn't sit. "Handle it better," he said, then turned to James. "Got your back, Sarge." James gave a small nod. His face calm but his chest tight. He hadn't expected Ray, not after all these years. It was another thread from his past, pulling tight. The principal called another name, and the ceremony rolled on, but the tension didn't break. James caught a new movement. Cole, the taller guard, slipped out the side door, his phone to his ear. Tanner stayed, his eyes darting between James and the stage. Something was shifting, and James felt it. He thought of Lena, how she'd always said, "Truth comes out, even if it takes time." He hoped she was right. Maya's name was closer now, maybe 10 students away. He pictured her waiting backstage, nervous but strong, her cap probably crooked again. He wanted to be there when she walked, no distractions, no fights. Then another twist hit. The side door opened and Cole returned, but he wasn't alone. A woman in a sharp blazer, maybe 50, with a school board badge, walked in beside him. Her face was all business, her eyes scanning the gym. She whispered to Cole, who pointed at James. The woman, badge reading Dr. Bennett, headed straight for Ms. Harris. The crowd watched, sensing something big. Ms. Harris met her halfway. Their conversation hushed but intense. James caught words like miscommunication and escalation. Dr. Bennett glanced at him, her face unreadable, then turned back to Ms. Harris. "Fix this now," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Ms. Harris nodded, her lips tight. Marcus leaned toward James. "School board's here. This just got bigger." James didn't respond, but his mind raced. Lawson's exit, Tanner's orders, now this. Someone high up had pulled strings, and they were scrambling to cover it. He'd seen it in the army, people bending rules, then ducking when caught. Dr. Bennett approached James, her voice low. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry for the trouble. You're staying right here." James nodded, his voice steady. "Appreciate that." She hesitated like she wanted to say more, then walked away. Tanner watched, his face pale, his radio silent now. Cole stood by the door, looking lost. The crowd's claps grew louder as another name was called. James felt the room's energy shift. Support was building, not just from his squad but from strangers. A man in the back stood, clapping for no reason, then another. Mrs. Ellis smiled, her program fanning her face. Maya's name was next. James's heart pounded, but he stayed still, his hands steady. He thought of Lena's words. "Stand tall." He was standing now, not just for Maya, but for every time he'd had to prove his place. The gym felt alive, but the quiet hum of Tanner's radio hinted at one more move, one more twist waiting to land.
The gym's lights flickered as the principal's voice boomed, calling another graduate's name. The crowd clapped, but the air stayed thick, charged with the weight of what had unfolded. James sat steady, his eyes on the stage, where Maya's moment was seconds away. His squad, Marcus, Darius, Caleb, Eli, and now Ray, stood close, their presence a quiet force. Tanner lingered by the side door, his face a mix of anger and nerves, his radio silent. Cole was gone again, vanished after Dr. Bennett's arrival. Ms. Harris sat rigid, her clipboard tight in her hands, glancing at the crowd like she expected more trouble. James felt the photo of Lena and Maya in his pocket, a steady reminder of why he wouldn't budge. A new twist hit fast. The principal paused, clearing his throat. "Before we continue, we have a special announcement," he said, his voice uneven. The crowd hushed, sensing something off. James's stomach tightened. He knew that tone. Something was coming, and it wasn't good. The principal adjusted his glasses. "We've been informed of a seating issue tonight. We apologize for any confusion." Murmurs rippled through the gym. Mrs. Ellis, fanning herself, muttered, "Confusion, my foot." Marcus leaned toward James, his voice low. "They're covering their tracks." James nodded, his eyes still on the stage. He'd seen this before, higher up smoothing over messes to save face. Then the twist deepened. A young woman in a graduate's gown rushed inside the stage, her cap nearly falling. It was Maya's friend, Sarah, who'd stood with her earlier. She whispered to principal, her face pale. He frowned, then handed her the mic. Sarah hesitated, then spoke, her voice shaking. "This isn't right. Someone told those guards to move Mr. Carter because of who he is." The gym went dead silent. A few gasps broke through. James's heart sank, not from the words, but from Sarah's nerve. She was risking her moment for him. The crowd stirred, phones out again, recording. Mrs. Ellis stood, clapping slow and loud. Others joined, a wave building. Tanner's face went white. He stepped back, his hand fumbling for his radio. Dr. Bennett, the school board woman, shot up from her seat, her eyes wide. "Young lady, that's enough," she said, her voice sharp but shaky. Sarah didn't back down. "No, ma'am. My dad's a cop. I know when someone's lying." The crowd roared, some cheering, others whispering. James looked at Maya backstage, her eyes locked on Sarah, proud but scared. He wanted to stand, to stop this before it grew bigger, but he stayed put. Lena's voice echoed in his mind. Let the truth come out. Sarah handed the mic back and returned to her place, her head high. Another twist landed. The side door swung open, and Cole reappeared, but not alone. A man in a sheriff's uniform followed, his badge glinting under the gym lights. He was older, grizzled, with a slow walk that commanded attention. The crowd's noise dipped as he approached Dr. Bennett. "Ma'am, we got a call about a disturbance," he said, his voice calm but firm. Dr. Bennett's face tightened. "It's handled, Sheriff." He raised an eyebrow, glancing at James, then Tanner. "Doesn't look handled to me." James recognized him, Sheriff Daniels, a man he'd met years ago at a veterans event. Daniels nodded at him, a small gesture of respect. James nodded back, his chest easing slightly. The sheriff turned to Tanner. "You the one causing trouble?" Tanner stammered. "No, sir, just doing my job." Daniels didn't blink. "Your job's to keep the peace, not start fights." He looked at James. "You good, Carter?" James kept his voice steady. "I'm here for my daughter." Daniels nodded. "Then stay put." He turned to Dr. Bennett. "Who gave the order to move him?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the empty spot where Lawson had been. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice thin. Daniels didn't buy it. "Mistakes of names. Find me one." The principal called Maya's name. The crowd erupted, louder than before, a mix of cheers and defiance. James stood, his heart pounding, as Maya walked across the stage, her smile bright but her eyes on him. He clapped, slow and steady, his squad joining in. Marcus muttered, "That's our girl." The gym felt alive, the air electric with support. But James knew it wasn't over. Tanner's radio buzzed again, a faint voice mentioning Lawson's name. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, catching it too. Something bigger was unraveling, and James felt it closing in, ready to change everything. Maya's name still echoed in the gym as she stepped off the stage, her diploma in hand, her smile wide but her eyes searching for James. He stood, clapping steady, his chest tight with pride. The crowd's cheers were a roar now, fueled by Sarah's bold words and the sheriff's presence. Marcus, Darius, Caleb, Eli, and Ray stood with him, their claps a quiet salute. Mrs. Ellis was on her feet, too, her program waving like a flag. Ms. Harris sat rigid, her face a mix of relief and worry. Tanner stood alone by the side door, his radio silent, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Sheriff Daniels leaned against the wall, watching everything, his badge catching the light. The air crackled, like the moment before a storm breaks. A new twist hit. A woman in a floral skirt, sitting near Mrs. Ellis, stood and pointed at Tanner. "I saw him talking to that slick guy outside," she said, her voice loud enough to carry. Before all this started. The crowd turned, murmurs growing. James kept his eyes on Maya, who was back with the graduates, but he heard every word. The slick guy had to be Lawson, the event coordinator who'd vanished. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floor. "Ma'am, you mean Tom Lawson?" he asked. The woman nodded. "Yeah, him. He was telling the guards to move someone, pointing right at this man." She gestured at James. The gym buzzed, phones out again, capturing the moment. Tanner's face went pale. "That's not true," he stammered, but his voice cracked. Daniels turned to him, slow and deliberate. "You want to explain that, son?" Tanner's eyes flicked to the door, like he wanted to run. "I was just following orders," he said, his hands up. Daniels didn't blink. "Whose orders?" Tanner hesitated, then muttered, "Lawson's." The crowd gasped, the pieces falling into place. James stayed still, his mind racing. Lawson had set this up. But why? He thought of Lena, how she'd always said, "People hide when they're guilty." Lawson was hiding now, but the truth was catching up. Another twist landed. Ms. Harris stood, her clipboard falling to the floor. "Sheriff, I need to say something," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The gym quieted. "I didn't know about Lawson's orders, but I heard rumors he was pushing for special seating for some board members' friends." Her eyes flicked to Dr. Bennett, who froze. The crowd murmured louder, anger mixing with shock. Dr. Bennett stood, her face tight. "That's nonsense, Karen. You know better." But her voice wavered, and the crowd wasn't buying it. Mrs. Ellis called out, "Sounds like favoritism to me." A few others shouted agreement, their voices rising. James kept his focus on the stage, where the principal called another name. He wanted to stay in this moment, to see Maya's joy, but the room was pulling him back. Marcus leaned in, his voice low. "They're falling apart, Carter. You just sit tight." James nodded, his hand steady. He thought of Rock, how his squad held the line when everything went wrong. They were holding it now, not with guns but with presence. Ray, the mechanic, stepped closer, his limp barely slowing him. "Lawson's been pulling strings for years," he muttered. "Heard he's got buddies on the board." James didn't respond, but the words hit hard. This wasn't just about him. It was a pattern, and he'd walked right into it. The sheriff turned to Dr. Bennett. "You know anything about the special seating?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp. She shook her head. "Too quick." "No, Sheriff. It's a misunderstanding." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Then why is Lawson gone?" Dr. Bennett had no answer. The crowd's claps for the next graduate were half-hearted, their attention on the drama. James felt Maya's eyes from the stage, her worry clear even from a distance. He gave her a small nod, his way of saying, "I'm okay." But he wasn't sure. The principal's voice droned on, but the gym felt like a courtroom. Every word a piece of evidence. A final twist hit. The side door creaked, and a teenage boy in a graduate's gown slipped in, his face nervous. He whispered to Ms. Harris, who gasped, then hurried to the sheriff. "Sheriff, this is Jason, one of our students," she said. "He says Lawson was on the phone outside, talking about fixing the problem before he left." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "Fixing what?" Jason swallowed hard. He said, "Make sure Carter doesn't stay." "I heard him." The gym erupted, voices shouting, some cheering. James's heart pounded, but he stayed still, his squad around him like a shield. The truth was out, and the stage was set for the final stand. The gym's noise swelled as the final graduate's name echoed, but the real energy was in the crowd's tension. James stood tall, his eyes locked on Maya, who sat with her classmates, her diploma clutched tight, her earlier stand at the mic. Sarah's courage and Jason's revelation about Lawson had turned the room into a battleground of truth. Marcus, Darius, Caleb, Eli, and Ray formed a silent wall around James, with Mrs. Ellis and others in the crowd nodding support. Sheriff Daniel stood firm, his gaze pinning Tanner, who looked small now, his radio dead. Ms. Harris gripped her seat, her face pale but resolute. Dr. Bennett sat frozen, her authority crumbling. The air was thick, ready for the final act. A twist hit hard. The principal, sensing the chaos, stepped to the mic. "Folks, let's wrap this up right," he said, his voice steady. "We've had some issues tonight, but this is about our graduates. And one more thing, Mr. James Carter, we honor your service and your place here." The crowd erupted, clapping loud, some standing. James didn't move, but his throat tightened. He hadn't asked for this, but it felt right, like Lena was watching. Maya stood with her classmates, her eyes shining, clapping harder than anyone. Marcus slapped James's shoulder, his grin wide. "That's how it's done, Sarge." Darius, Caleb, Eli, and Ray joined in, their claps a salute for men who'd faced hell together. Tanner broke. He stepped forward, his voice low, almost desperate. "I didn't know it was Lawson's call," he said, looking at James. "I was just doing what I told." The crowd quieted, waiting. James met his eyes, calm but firm. "You chose who to listen to," he said. "Next time, choose better." Tanner's shoulders sagged, and he backed away, disappearing through the side door. Sheriff Daniels watched him go, then turned to Dr. Bennett. "We'll be talking to Lawson tomorrow," he said, his tone final. Dr. Bennett nodded, her face ashen, and slipped out quietly. The crowd murmured, sensing justice taking root. Another twist landed. Maya broke from the graduate's line, rushing to James. She threw her arms around him, her cap falling to the floor. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she whispered, her voice thick. James hugged her tight, his eyes stinging. "You stole my thunder, baby girl," he said, his voice soft. The crowd watched, some wiping tears, others clapping again. Mrs. Ellis called out, "That's a father right there." Sarah and Jason joined Maya, their faces bright with pride. James looked at them, then at his squad, who stood tall, their eyes saying everything words didn't need to. He felt Lena's photo in his pocket, her presence in Maya's smile. The principal ended the ceremony, and the crowd rose, cheering for all the graduates. James's squad formed a line, each man shaking his hand, their grip strong. Marcus spoke last. "You didn't need us, Carter, but we're always here." James nodded, his voice steady. "I know." As the gym emptied, Sheriff Daniels approached. "You handled this right," he said. "Lawson's got no ground left here." James gave a small nod. "Just wanted to see my girl graduate." Daniels smiled. "You did more than that." Outside, under the Georgia stars, James and Maya walked to his truck. The air was cooler now, the lot quieter. Maya held her diploma, her eyes on her dad. "You didn't back down," she said. James stopped, looking at her. "Neither did you." She smiled Lena's smile and hugged him again. He thought of the years ahead, Maya's college, her dreams. He'd be there just like tonight. The squad's taillights faded in the distance, but their bond stayed close. Mrs. Ellis waved from her car, her grandson beside her, and James waved back a silent thank you. The moral lesson settled in James's heart, clear as the night sky. Stand your ground with dignity, and those who matter will stand with you. He'd faced a push to move him, rooted in bias, but his silence, his squad's loyalty, and a community's courage turned around. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about proving his place for Maya, for Lena, for himself. As he started the truck, Maya asleep in the passenger seat, he whispered to the stars, "We did it, love." The road home stretched ahead, and James drove, steady as ever, carrying the night's victory in his soul.